Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us on the third of our Steps Travels in Conversation with. And tonight I'm delighted to have with us Sophie Ibbotson. Now,
Good
Sophie,
evening.
you are so talented. You wear so many different hats. If I was to read out your CV, we'd be here all night. So what I'm going to do instead is read out an excerpt from your LinkedIn profile that you wrote about yourself. So if you're not happy with it, you need to go and change your profile. You say, I'm a consultant, writer, and trustee of the Royal Society for Asian Affairs, with a particular interest in economic and cultural development, tourism, and water security. If you want to know what's going to happen in a country, follow the money. The bankers and lawyers know what is going on well before politicians, diplomats, and the press. I've applied this thinking for more than a decade in challenging environments from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe. Do you think that sums you up, maybe?
I think that's fairly fair, and certainly the gallivanting in more unusual parts of the world.
Oh, we'll come to that. But well, thank you very much for being with us here. Not least that yesterday was your birthday, so a very happy
It
birthday to
was.
you. Yeah, a very happy
Thank you.
birthday. I wanted to start with maybe I know that your journey is anything but conventional, shall we say? That you studied Oriental Studies at Cambridge. I don't know what period after that, but you've driven an auto rickshaw from India to Kyrgyzstan. So how do those early experiences shape your view of the world and travel in general?
I always knew that I wanted to travel and to work abroad. I come from a family of fairly serious travellers, both in terms of Indian Army or British Army in India, tea planters. My aunt did VSO in Afghanistan in the 60s. So when I was growing up, there were always lots of people who'd been to interesting places and had interesting stories to tell. And when I was in my late teens, I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll go and join the Foreign Office. This will take me to exciting places. So I decided to study Oriental languages and focusing on South Asia because that was where I had family links. But I got distracted immediately after university and never actually applied to the Foreign Office, which was probably just as well for them and for me. But I always wanted to go more and more places, and that huge amount of curiosity. I like people, I like learning, and the thought of being stuck in an office from 9 to 5 was desperately sad. So I was always on the lookout for opportunities to go to new places, try new things. And now 20 odd years on, and I still wake up every day excited because I don't know quite what the day is going to involve or where I'm going to be next.
I like you am a big believer in curiosity and also people. I love people. We'll come on to the people bit, but I saw it recently. I think it was when Sir Mark Tully died last week. You wrote a post and you said that my life has been blessed by a succession of people who have arrived at just the right moment. So he was a mentor to you. You've had other mentors in your life that have either inspired that curiosity or that passion to travel.
Certainly, I've been incredibly fortunate. And you mentioned in the introduction that I'm a trustee of the Royal Society for Asian Affairs. And that certainly is one of the organisations that shaped me. I joined the society when I was 17, before I even went up to university. And I met so many people, sadly, a number of whom are no longer with us, who had spent their careers abroad and done extraordinary things, often in the 1950s, 1960s. And they, when I was in my early 20s, were many years retired, but still had that wanderlust, and they wanted to be able to share their expertise and also, I think, give back and find out what was going on in their favourite parts of the world. So I got to know a number of brilliant people, including a chap called Hugh Leach, who a number of people on this call might have come up to, who was a military officer and explorer. He travelled quite extensively with Freya Stark. So he was a wonderful person. Another chap called Bill Norton, who was the son of the mountaineer Norton, who had set the Everest or set the altitude record when he came back from Everest. So a number of people like that, and they always gave me a huge amount of their time as well as their expertise. And I feel very grateful because they certainly pointed me in new directions, and they challenged me and encouraged me to go to places and do things that I would have been far too nervous to do otherwise. there was never a, oh no, you can't do that, you're a girl, or oh no, you can't do that, you're far too young. It's, well, 40 years ago I did this, and I think it's about time you went back and had a look at it for me.
Yeah.
Which has been truly wonderful.
And you'd encourage people, or anybody listening, to join something like the Royal Society for Asian Affairs?
I think so, because these are communities of people with extraordinary experience and shared interest. And it doesn't actually matter necessarily which of the societies you join. I mean, the Royal Geographical Society is wonderful, the Royal Asiatic Society. I like the Royal Society for Asian Affairs because it focuses on contemporary Asia, and it does have a history of exploration and diplomacy. In fact, it was born out of the Great Game in 1901. So for me, that was a good place to be, because I like the politics and the diplomacy and the spying and all of the intrigue that goes with it. And geographically, the places that I'm most interested in fall within its remit.
So you mentioned the Great Game. If I'm right, Peter Hopkirk's book, The Great Game, starts with Connolly and Stoddart languishing in the dungeons of the Emir of Bukhara, I think. Central Asia is one of your areas of expertise. When did you first travel there, and do you want to tell us a bit about your love affair, if you will, of that region?
I first went to Central Asia in 2008, and really it was completely unplanned. A friend of mine at university had a bet that we couldn't drive an auto rickshaw halfway around the world, and for whatever reason, I thought this was a terribly good idea. I didn't have a job lined up, and so I thought I would start. And started in India, up in Darjeeling, and we're planning on coming all the way back to London. And Central Asia was on my radar insofar as it was on the way. I was expecting to pass through. I didn't know a great deal about it other than in its connection with the Silk Road. But I thought, oh yes, Kyrgyzstan, go over the mountains, keep going, keep going, keep going. What I hadn't really factored in was that it gets to 25 degrees below freezing coming over the mountains in Kyrgyzstan in winter, and auto rickshaws are not good in the cold, and they're certainly not good on ice. And I was with friends, and we had two of these auto rickshaws, one of which we got into quite a nasty accident, at which point, faced with our own mortality, we thought actually probably we had better stop in the winter. The Tian Shan mountains in the middle of the winter is not the place to be driving, and given that Kazakhstan and the steppe would have been next, definitely not a good idea. So we stopped and stayed in Kyrgyzstan, and I was offered a job working for the Ministry of Economy. And that is really how I got into tourism, because tourism was one of the departments within the ministry. And for the first time, I had the opportunity to get stuck in there, to start researching the different parts of the country. I started working with Bradt, the travel guidebook company, initially updating their guidebooks and then writing new ones. But because I was living in Bishkek, so the capital of Kyrgyzstan, for 4 years, I got to really know Central Asia. And it was a time when there weren't that many foreigners there who were not attached either to the military or to the embassies or to the mines. And therefore, there were lots of opportunities for me to get involved with academia, with consultancy, with journalism, and all sorts of activities, and to learn in quite a holistic way about the places. And what I've found in the 18 years since is that although periodically I do go away from Central Asia, I will be working in the Middle East or the Caucasus or the Balkans, Central Asia always draws me back. It's a region which is changing so fast and has so much going on that even if I want to change tack in my career and be doing more water work or more diplomacy or more academic research, there is always a reason that it should be in Central Asia.
So you talked a lot about Kyrgyzstan there, and I think I went there first about 15 years ago, so a few years after you. And it's known for its scenery, but also for its nomadic culture. But one of the things that struck me, though, I do a talk sometimes, and I have 3 shots of essentially the same yurt. One is that if you see this yurt here on the left, you think that the nomadic culture has remained unchanged for centuries. Now, if you look at the one in the middle, you see the satellite dish by the side, and also the panels, the solar panels. But you go inside, and they have a big screen TV and DVD player. So, to what extent do you think that is it still a very nomadic culture, or is it like Kazakhstan, where when I was there, I think 2 years ago, my guide was saying that yes, well, I think now is it 70% of the population in Kazakhstan now live in cities or something? So many fewer than in the countryside. And she was saying that very few people still live that nomadic lifestyle, certainly in Kazakhstan. I'm not sure about, we'll come to Kyrgyzstan. And that the yurt is used for weddings and tradition, and also perhaps for tourism a little bit.
That's certainly the case. During the Soviet period, most of the nomadic communities within Central Asia were forcefully urbanized, and it had a devastating impact, particularly in Kazakhstan, but also in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan as well. A lot of people died, a lot of people starved because they lost their flocks. A lot of people also fled to Western China or over the border to Afghanistan. And the reason that there is a Kyrgyz and Wakhi permanent population in Afghanistan is because they fled ahead of the Soviets, and then later the borders solidified and they couldn't go back to their traditional territories. In Kyrgyzstan, the population is not nomadic these days, but their nomadic heritage is still a very important part of their culture. The way they think, the way they behave, the way they practice their identity is very much reflective of their nomadic past. And it's one of the reasons why the country feels so different from Uzbekistan, where you have got a predominantly settled population. It's the different histories.
And you're heading off to Kyrgyzstan later this year for the Nomadic Games. Speaking of nomadics, September time, I think it is.
Yes,
yep.
The World Nomad Games. I saw, I think it was a BBC article describing it as what the Olympics would like if you put Genghis Khan in charge, which I think is quite a nice description. And the wonderful thing about the World Nomad Games, which was founded in Kyrgyzstan, but has subsequently been in Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Turkey, and so on, is that it's not just about the sport. So you can go, and of course you can see the horse sports, the archery, the wrestling, but it's also a celebration of wider nomadic identity, which are often under threat in the modern world. So people are there able to wear their traditional costumes, enjoy their traditional music, their dance, their food, put up their yurts, and encourage other nomadic communities from all over the world to come and do likewise.
I was at the Kazakh Games, which was, I think, in September 24, and I remember the opening ceremony. I was surprised to see a British team there, but I'm not quite sure. A slightly tenuous link, but it was good to see them there. You're ambassador for Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is obviously known for its sort of Khiva, Bukhara, Samarkand. But if you were people to visit, would you say obviously go and see those sites? But where else would you try and encourage people to see? And especially before we came on screen, you were saying that you hosted a group of journalists in Uzbekistan during the winter, trying to get away from the sort of spring and autumn, the very busy seasons there, and trying to spread, I suppose, the effects of tourism throughout the year, and also not just centered on one or two places.
Indeed. Uzbekistan only really started its tourism development and promotion about 10 years ago, so 2017. And what we saw first is that they developed tourism in the easiest places, in the UNESCO World Heritage Sites in Samarkand, Khiva, Bukhara. And in the same way that if you're a first-time visitor to India, you're probably going to go to the Taj Mahal, it's the same in Uzbekistan. And I would certainly say to anybody who's going to Uzbekistan, of course, you've got to see these things. However, they are only a small proportion of what the country has to offer, and actually, historically speaking, relatively late, because the great monuments that people think of with the Silk Road in Uzbekistan are predominantly from the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries. There is a huge amount of history that predates that, including the pre-Islamic history. And if you're interested in archaeology, it's an extraordinary place to be. In my view, the two best places for ancient history are Karakalpakstan, which is an autonomous republic in the west of the country, and that was always the borderlands. It's a bit like the sort of the strip between England and Scotland. So you have got dozens of desert fortresses, and most of them are very, very rarely visited. So you might have an entire fortress to yourself that's 2,000 years old. The other area that has got phenomenal archaeological sites is around Termez in Secundaria region, right in the south. And this is the area along the Oxus River. So you can look out across the river at Afghanistan. And this is the area where Buddhism first settled, if you like, when it spread up from India. And there are still the remains of two large Buddhist monasteries there. at Fayez Tepe and Kara Tepe, one of which has been preserved and is quite intact. The other is less visible above ground, but has got sort of a cave complex as part of it, so cave monasteries. So that is absolutely fascinating. And close by are the ruins of a city called Campe Tepe, also known as Alexandria on the Oxus, which is thought to have been built by Alexander the Great. And it's a reminder of how global this part of the world was even 2,500 years ago, that the Greeks had their cities there, Buddhism from India, Zoroastrianism from Iran and from Azerbaijan. And I think it's really important to appreciate that, because that then explains why Islam developed the way that it did in Uzbekistan, and why it doesn't look like Islam even in Pakistan, and certainly not in the Middle East. It's got its own identity because it didn't reject what was there before, it just absorbed it all. So there are aspects of Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Judaism, Nestorian Christianity, paganism, all wrapped up in the Central Asian Sufism that they practice.
Do you want to say a little bit more about that how Islam is different there in Uzbekistan, and in what way? In the way that people pray or come to the mosque in the first place, or how they behave and act when they're in the mosque?
There are two different aspects of it. So firstly, the historic forms of Islam were spread really by missionaries, by wandering saints. And the best way that they could get the local population to adopt a new faith was by giving them something that was already familiar, which is why this religious syncretism is so important. And those saints often would conduct some form of miracle, and that would be the sign that this was the faith to be following, the new faith. But because it was mixing in all of these older traditions, what you find is that the shrines and the practice are not recognizable to Orthodox Islam. So you will find, for example, evidence of fire worship. And if you go, I was in Turkmenistan about 18 months ago, and some of the Muslim shrines had got, even now, the burnt embers because people had been lighting the fire, which comes from their Zoroastrian past. Similarly, I've seen in Turkmenistan little effigies or little figurines. People would leave, for example, a toy cradle if they wanted to have a baby, a little figurine of a woman in a wedding dress if they wanted to get married, or a key if they wanted an apartment. And these sorts of practices just wouldn't be considered to be Islamic elsewhere. Kazakhstan, the big shrine in Turkestan, a lot of Central Asian Muslims that believe that if you go to that shrine 3 times on pilgrimage, that it is equivalent to going on Hajj. However, if you speak to somebody from Egypt or from Saudi Arabia, that is an absolute sacrilegious thing to be saying. Yeah. The other influencing factor, of course, is the 80 years of Soviet control in Central Asia, when, to all intents and purposes, religion was banned. So a lot of people did stop practicing. Atheism was very much the norm, and that broke the transmission of traditions through the generations. So a lot of people now are Muslim on paper, I would say, in a very, very secular society. And those who are becoming more religious are having to learn about their faith from scratch, because it's not that they were able to learn from their grandparents and their parents. They weren't brought up religious. It's something that they have had to relearn. As a tourist, it makes for a very intriguing combination. But at a basic level, it means that most people you meet are, I often say they're Muslim in the way that many English people are sort of Christian. It's a sort of, we go to church at Christmas and Easter. A lot of Uzbeks would go to church, or go to the mosque for Eid, but they're not going to be praying 5 times a day. They're not going to the mosque every Friday. They drink alcohol. They're not wearing religious dress. And although they might be socially conservative, their religious views, if they have any, are pretty moderate.
I'd agree with all that in my experiences there. And I'll come back to something you said about sort of the crossroads and sort of the Alexander, the Greeks being there, etc. But I just want to ask one other place in Uzbekistan, maybe that apart from Temez and Karakum, Pakistan, that you didn't mention, Fergana Valley.
So the Fergana Valley is very much the breadbasket of Central Asia. It's predominantly within Uzbekistan, but there are parts of it within Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan as well. It's got a lot more water and therefore became a lot more fertile. A lot of the agricultural centres are there, but connected to that, then the development of handicrafts. So one of the cities, which is quite well known, is Margelan, and that is the centre of silk production. And the reason is that if you're going to raise silkworms, you have to have mulberry trees to feed them. And so the crafts have developed there as well. One other thing that's quite interesting about the Fergana Valley, it is the birthplace of Babur, who was the founder of the Mughal dynasty. And anybody who's travelled in Pakistan and northern India will have known of the Mughals, because not only the Taj Mahal, but also Humayun's tomb, Agra Fort, Delhi Fort, and so on. So the founder of the dynasty, Babur, claimed descent, albeit on slightly fuzzy grounds, from both Timur and from Genghis Khan. He was born in the Fergana Valley, and his original plan was to recreate the empire of his ancestor Timur. And he tried twice to take Samarkand, because that had been Timur's capital, but he never managed to hold on to it. And rather than thinking, okay, I'll give it a third attempt, instead he decided to turn his attention south, because Timur had also taken Delhi. And so he began reconstructing the empire to the south rather than in the Central Asian heartland.
And he's buried in Kabul then. So if he, yes, as you said, he founded the Mughal dynasty, but he requested to be buried in Kabul. And why there rather than Fergana Valley? I'm not sure the history. Maybe you know. I don't want to sidetrack too much down history, but
no. So once he left Central Asia, he lost his territories there. His empire then was effectively what today would be the southern part of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and northern India. He ideally, I think, probably would have gone back to Fergana. And when you read his memoir, the Baburnama, he waxes lyrical about the climate and the culture and the best melons in the world. He's got a particular thing for melons. And he really doesn't like India very much. He finds it noisy and chaotic, and he doesn't like the fact that they don't garden properly. And he's got all of these sort of complaints, because he, as far as he was concerned, he came from a very Persianate high culture. And then he's ended up in this savage land. But that is why that he wants to go back to Afghanistan, because as far as he's concerned, Afghanistan represents civilization.
One other question about Astan, Tajikistan, which you've written the guidebook for Bradt Guides. And again, trying to get people off the beaten track. Most people go to Dushanbe and maybe the Pamir Highway. Where else might you suggest that they travel there in
I think one of the most accessible places and most attractive places is the Fan Mountains. And if you've been in Samarkand and you go east, it's only a couple of hours drive to the Tajik border, and you can get very easily into the Fan Mountains in a way that you can't so easily get to the Pamir Highway. The Fan Mountains, you have obviously got the mountains there, it's in the name, and some beautiful mountain lakes, but there are also historical sites there. So you have got Surazm, which is a 4,500-year-old archaeological site with UNESCO World Heritage status. And you've also got ancient Penj Kent, which was a Sogdian trading city in the sort of 4th, 5th, 6th century AD, very important on the Silk Road. And they have excavated fantastic wall paintings there, as well as a number of other artifacts. And you can see those in the National Museum of Antiquities in Dushanbe.
You talked earlier about sort of the Greeks. We talked about Persian influence, and there's a mosque outside Mazar Sharif in Afghanistan that again had this incredible Zoroastrian influence there. And I think it's something that we almost forgot, as you say, the exchange of cultures and peoples. And it was either Baba's son or grandson was actually displaced for a while and went back to Iran. And then when he came back from Iran, he brought a whole load of artisans with him, and that influenced sort of Mughal art hugely. But how's the region changing now in terms of sort of people's powers, influence?
It's a really mixed bag. Certainly, had you gone to Central Asia in the 1990s or even the early 2000s, the dominant foreign culture and political and economic influence would have been Russia. That is no longer the case for a number of factors. One, that Russia has got its own problems and has sort of had to retreat into itself in that direction. Obviously, we know its full-scale invasion of Ukraine and is throwing its weight around elsewhere, but it is certainly much less influential in Central Asia than it was. What we have seen is much more interest from China. So China is now the major trading partner with most of the Central Asian republics, particularly in countries like Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, where they're economically and politically not so stable, and other investors are not necessarily keen to get involved. China has moved in and swept up. It's quite different, however, in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, because they are that much more stable. So President Mirziyoyev in Uzbekistan has said, which I think is quite a sensible move, that he's pursuing a multi-vector foreign policy and really trying to bring in partners from all over the world. And what we're seeing, therefore, is, yes, China is present, but there is also a lot of investment coming from the GCC countries, from Turkey, some from Iran, from Europe, and increasingly from South Asia as well. So he's just been, I think actually probably there at the moment, has gone to Pakistan on an official visit. And this is an interesting thing for me to see, because historically, because of the things we've been talking about, the Silk Roads and the Timurids and the Mughals, there was huge ties between Central and South Asia. But in the Soviet period, those ties were severed, and Central Asia looks north. Now, the last few years, starting to look south again. Part of that's looking to Afghanistan, trying to stabilize the security situation, but also to improve the transport infrastructure. Projects like the Trans-Afghan Railway, if that ever happens, will be quite an extraordinary rail route from Central Asia across Afghanistan down to Karachi and Gwadar. But also making sure that there are two-way trade with Pakistan and with India as well.
And how interested is the region in tourism? I know that you do a lot of work with national governments, also with the World Bank, in terms of trying to encourage tourism, and how are the local communities sort of benefiting from it in different ways?
Generally, there's a huge amount of interest in tourism because it is seen to be a way of creating jobs, and all of the countries have got very fast growing populations, very young populations. So making sure that there are opportunities for employment and for business is a real national priority. There also seem to be high quality jobs. People don't really want to be involved in mining or farming and sort of traditional industries unless they absolutely have to be. Tourism is a bit more glamorous, it's a bit more fun. And the opportunities to make yourself professionally and establish a good business makes it a lot more attractive. And so even at a little level, one of the projects I had, you mentioned the World Bank, in Tajikistan, we had a rural economy development project for 5 years. And a lot of that was about stimulating tiny little businesses in the middle of nowhere. And a lot of people did want to open a homestay or a guest house or a cafe because they saw that foreigners were coming through and there were opportunities to participate in the tourism value chain and create opportunities locally, which is really, really important for the region, because when the economies are in the doldrums, a lot of people leave either to go to the cities or to go abroad. So a lot of migration to Kazakhstan, to Russia, and then actually in the last few years to the UK and Europe as well. But that means that families are then split. They're dependent on a relative abroad sending back money, and it's much more socially and economically sustainable if people can stay within their own countries and make a good living.
You mentioned right at the beginning about people. People are important to you, and I think in your LinkedIn you actually say everything I do starts and ends with people. And I'm the same for me. Travel is about people. How would you encourage either tour operators like ourselves or travelers to try and meet people and sort of in meaningful ways when they're traveling?
When you visit, obviously your bucket list is going to have a list of monuments and sightseeing you want to do. However, that is actually only a tiny part of the experience that you can have. And therefore, I always really try and encourage people to look at the immersive community-based experiences. And those can be very simple things. So when I took the journalist to Uzbekistan last month, we went to a local bakery and we did a bread baking masterclass with the 3 or 4 family members from the bakery. And we were probably there an hour and a half, cooking together, eating lunch together. And you end up laughing and joking and having a really wonderful rapport, even if you don't have a lot of language in common. Similarly, if you're staying in somebody's home, in a homestay, and those are wonderful, particularly in some of the rural areas, you get to see a very different aspect of life. You get up, you have breakfast together. You might, one member of the family might take you out for a walk. Another one might be preparing lunch. Somebody else might want to show you the chickens. There are many, many ways that you can engage and immerse yourself in the way that others live.
When I last saw you, when we met for lunch with a group of STEP clients back in December, you confessed your weakness for retail therapy, I think. And you were talking about shopping, and it was in Uzbekistan, and there were a couple of either women who are involved in fashion and also the shops that you were talking about, but which are again not slightly off the beaten track, I think. But
given the rich textiles heritage of Central Asia, it should come as no surprise that fashion is a big thing. And it's another thing that I think has changed quite a lot in the last few years. One, people are less inclined to try and ape international fashions. They've become proud of their own national designs and have found, because of the tourism and because of local people having more money, that there is now a market for modern fashion, but that uses traditional techniques or traditional fabrics and says something about the cultural identity of the country. One of the ladies I really like is based in Samarkand. She's a designer called Elena Ladik, and she has a shop called Happy Bird. And what she does is she takes vintage textiles, including things which have been damaged or have no longer got a use for them anymore, and she upcycles them into haute couture. And she produces the most fantastic, over-the-top coats and dresses. I mean, if you wore one, you'd weigh about 10 kilos more with the weight of all of the embroidery and the beadwork. But you'd feel like royalty. All of the silks and the embroidery, just beautiful, beautiful things.
One of your many hats is writing. You've done a lot of travel writing. I think you've written 6 books for Bradt, is that right? Yeah. And probably worked with National Geographic, Lonely Planet, and others. How do you have to keep on updating them with, given that what you were saying that the places, or Central Asia, the region is changing so fast? That must be a sort of perennial problem, is it? Sort of keeping guidebooks up to date and relevant.
Yes, Bradt usually tries to update their guidebooks every 3 years, and particularly for a destination like Uzbekistan, that's really, really important. There are other destinations. I mean, I did, for example, the first guidebook to South Sudan, but it will probably not surprise you that hasn't sold so many copies, and there's not necessarily a huge market demand for an update, but we'll see.
Maybe. I think I have a copy, and I went there a couple of years, and I think I do know that now. Now you say that, okay, yeah, and the Madari, the cattle with the cattle and stuff. So yeah, so wonderful.
But it's much more important for a destination like Uzbekistan. But even just having a guidebook, we did one for Kyrgyzstan 2 or 3 years ago, and the local tourism department, the businesses we met, and the people were just so thrilled to have a guidebook, because it sounds funny about sort of putting them on the map. They always get ignored in favor of Uzbekistan and their larger neighbors. So the fact that a company like Bradt had said, actually, no, we think you're important in your own right. We're not just going to put you in a Central Asia book or an Uzbekistan book and give you a few pages at the back. We're going to give you a whole book with a chapter on your history and chapter on your geography, and really sell everything you have to offer. A lot of people seem to feel very proud about that, and it was a really nice project to contribute to.
Speaking of writing as well, you well, I think earlier you said it's coming out early next year. Or in the process of writing a book on the Oxus or the Amu Darya. Can you give us a sneak preview? Tell us a little bit about that.
The Amu Darya, which historically was called the River Oxus, is the longest river in Central Asia, and it starts in the Wakhan Corridor in Afghanistan, and it flows westward about 2,500 kilometers, and it used to end in the Aral Sea, although sadly the Aral Sea is now shrinking, so the river doesn't quite meet it. And there are lots of books about rivers. You've got books on the Nile, and you've got books on the Tigris and the Amazon and so on, but there wasn't a book on the Oxus, and I thought this was a little bit unfair, particularly because it's a river not only that gives life to all of Central Asia. I mean, the vast majority of the region could not exist without that river because they have so little rainfall, but it's also enables me to tell the environmental history of the region, the history of trade, the history of transport, and the stories of the people who live along the river.
And is that the most important aspect to you, the stories, being a storyteller for people and giving them a voice?
I think so. Buildings are beautiful, landscapes are beautiful, but there has to be a narrative attached to them to explain why they're important. And for me, that's where the storytelling comes in, is actually providing the context and the focus for whoever the audience is, whether they are readers, whether they're people attending a lecture. The question is always, why does it matter?
But I'm a big believer with you about people. I gave a talk a few weeks ago, and somebody said to me, you remember the name of every guide you've had? And I said, yes, I do. That's what stands out. I don't remember the decor of where I'm staying, but it's those people, those personalities who stand out. And in your travels, you must have met some hugely interesting people, different guides.
Completely. I often say, and I say it for Uzbekistan, but it's true for a number of other places as well. People go for the monuments, but what they remember long afterwards is the people that they meet along the way. And some of those encounters are only very short. It might be somebody you had a cup of tea with, but often they end up evolving into long-term friendships. And I've got friends, for example, in Kashmir and Ladakh, who I met 15 years ago when I was guidebook writing. We still keep in touch. We still communicate on WhatsApp. If I happen to be in the region, we'll get together. And I really value those long-term relationships, even if they were a chance encounter to begin with.
And so you would, in short, encourage people to travel to Central Asia, spend time with the people and as much as possible. Yeah. And
absolutely.
We're big advocates in slow travel, that you should try and travel slightly longer in somewhere, not least because of your carbon footprint, but because of that reason that you said, that you get so much more out of it, the people that you meet. And sometimes it's those serendipitous little moments as you're sitting somewhere watching the world go by. So
absolutely. The only warning I would give you is that it might well get under your skin, and you'll find yourself going back time and again to see
that's
more
a good thing for a tour operator like us. So we want to encourage that. And have you got any travel plans? I think you touched on Saudi, but you were in Saudi at the end of last year, I think. You're
yes.
looking at projects up north near the Jordanian border.
I did a couple of trips to Saudi Arabia with the World Bank at the end of last year. One to Jazan in the south, which is a region bordering Yemen, and then the other to Al Jawf in the north, up towards the Jordanian border. Before I went, I certainly would say I had a certain set of expectations of what Saudi Arabia was going to be like, particularly being a foreign woman. Actually, very few of them were accurate. It was a very interesting country, very actually easy place to be a female traveller. I've met a lot of Saudi women who are working in all different spheres, from government to shops to hotels, very, very highly educated, erudite. And yes, many of them chose to wear sort of full face niqab coverings, but it didn't stop them doing their jobs. It didn't stop them interacting. And there was no assumption that I should be dressed like that. It was, well, I choose what I'm wearing, you wear what you like to wear.
I love you for saying that, because I'm a big believer and advocate in that travel breaks down sort of the barriers and prejudice, preconception, the stereotypes that we have of different peoples and places. And it's only by going there, and you, rather than judging from afar, you learn and understand, and that empathy that you have when you travel.
And it's whet my appetite to learn more about Saudi Arabia, and hopefully we'll go back there in April, and I will go back to those same two regions, but I'd also like to see more of the country.
My marketing team will kick me for asking this, but I want to just quickly ask about Afghanistan. But obviously, for your book, you were traveling there, and I think you first went there maybe 2010 or 12, around there, and I know that you were there last year. But again, from a female perspective, not least what's happened with the Taliban, that girls beyond primary school are not allowed to go to school. Do you want to say a little bit about your feelings, your perspective in traveling there most recently?
Afghanistan at the moment is really difficult. Not difficult to travel around, because in fact the security and the infrastructure is better than it was before the Taliban came back. So you can travel between cities without an armed escort. Places which were considered out of bounds before are no longer. I was able to check into hotels in places where I'd previously had to stay in a compound. So certain aspects of it have got a lot easier. What I find difficult is the privileges that I am afforded by the fact that I am there as a white foreigner with money. Those privileges are not afforded to local women. So a good example would be the Blue Mosque in Mazar-e-Sharif, very, very famous, spectacular looking building. Local women are not allowed into the mosque compound, whereas as a foreign woman, as a tourist, you are allowed. And that doesn't sit comfortably with me. Obviously, I feel very grateful that I can visit and I can do these things. But, well, hopefully one day the opportunities will be afforded to the people whose country it is, the people whose culture it is as well.
I agree. It's not even just the mosque, because even the Babur Gardens in Kabul, the women are no longer allowed in there. And which future travel plans? Are you off somewhere soon or later this year?
I'll be going back to Uzbekistan in March for Navruz, which is the Persian New Year, and it's one of the biggest holidays or festivals of the year, and one that involves all the different Turkic and Persian communities, not only in Uzbekistan but in neighbouring countries as well. It's also a lovely time because the weather's not too hot. It's just before the tourist season gets going in earnest, and if you are in the rural areas, often you've got the spring flowers and the greenery before the baking heat of the summer. So I think Navruz is a very nice time to be there. I'm also planning to go back to Kyrgyzstan for the World Nomadic Games. I think that's going to be a real.
Are you going to compete in anything?
I hope not.
As I said, there was a British team 2 years ago, so hopefully you are competing in something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure sporting prowess is my thing in any kind of sport. I will spectate and take photographs. Sophie,
it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. I'd love to carry on for hours and hours. And I know that there's a group of our clients who you're very are lucky to have you hosting, leading them in Uzbekistan, September, October time, I think it is. But we would love to do. Sorry?
I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I know that they are hugely. And we look forward to working with you again. And you're speaking at the Sherborne Literary Festival in April, is that right?
Yes, Sherborne Travel Writing Festival.
Travel Writing, sorry.
I'll be speaking there on the Saturday.
And to look out for your book that comes out early next year, yeah?
Yes, please.
And any other opportunity? Where else can we I don't know, listen to you?
I'm usually speaking at a number of the travel shows, so I will be. They've just passed for this year, but next year I will almost certainly be speaking at destinations and at the Adventure Travel Show.
Okay, great. Sorry, I just see there's a question that popped up, but it's disappeared. I can't see it. If we want to.
Yes, Justin, there's a very nice question here from Alison and Michael Brown. They would love to know if Steps plan to ask Sophie to run a Nabatean culture trip to northwest Saudi and Jordan for Steps. Now, I would be delighted as being involved in Steps marketing if that were to be the case. But over to you, Justin and Sophie.
Well, I say yes, Sophie.
I say
Well,
yes.
it sounds absolutely extraordinary. My only hesitation would be I don't have the depth of historical knowledge about the Nabateans. I am working in Saudi. I am working in Jordan. I think it would be very important for you to have a guide with very good understanding of the archaeology, but possibly the compromise is that we have a good local guide who really understands the depth of the history, and then I can come along to entertain you.
Well,
Or we give
that's
you
one of
time
our
to
key.
brush up.
One of our key strengths is the guides that we work with around the world. I think there are lots of good tour operators out there, but I think that we hopefully stand above most in terms of that relationship we have with the people we work with, the knowledge of the guides, the insight that they have, and the fact that they're storytellers. They're not just going to give you a litany of facts and figures, but they will give you a lot more insight than that. And so too somebody like yourself. Giles, is there any other questions that have popped up that I can't
Not as yet.
see?
Not as yet.
Well, Sophie, I'm sure there will be other questions, and if you want to, and we are going to record. We have been recording this. We will send it out, and if they have any other questions, we might put them to you. And
That would be great. You can certainly
in our magazine or an e-news a series of questions. So, but thank you so
email
much.
me.
Sorry. Thank you so
email me.
We will do. Thank you so much for your time. Not least that it was the day after your birthday. It's a pleasure and a privilege having you. So, Sophie, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you
Take
very
care.
much. Bye.